Hello, and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's, the podcast that laughs in the face of bank holiday weekends and gets on with the job of teeing you up for the week ahead in British politics.
My name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and with me, as always, is Jack Blanchard of Politico. And this week, we're neither at his house nor my house, but sitting in a Sky edit suite in Westminster.
Why are we here, Sam? I feel like you haven't left this place for about 3 or 4 days now.
I got here at 5 a.m. on Friday morning and have been pretty much continually living here. So this is my house at the moment. I think I clocked up 15 hours continually sitting in the studio with Sophie Ridge over Friday and Saturday.
Thoughts and prayers for anyone who's watched 15 hours of Sam Coates this weekend.
Thoughts and prayers for anyone who had to spend 15 hours in the same airspace as me.
I've been to the park and the ballet and sort of kept a vague eye on the election results coming in, so I feel your pain, Sam.
Not at all.
It has been a seismic weekend for British politics, with the local and regional election results rolling in from across England all the way up to Saturday night. I think we can safely say, sitting here on Sunday afternoon, that the headlines are predictably dire for the Tories and predictably jolly for Labour and the Lib Dems. So we need to talk about what all that means for the week ahead as Keir Starmer enjoys a victory lap and Rishi Sunak tries desperately, Sam, to get back on the front foot.
He'll be helped, Rishi Sunak, by the fact that it's going to be an important week for the UK economy, with interest rates decisions on Thursday and, more importantly, stats revealing whether or not we've come out of recession the following day. And there's plenty going on in Scotland as well, with maybe the coronation of a new First Minister or, as it looks more likely, an SNP leadership contest due to get underway this week. But before all that, how did we do last week?
Well, how did we do last week? I would say we got most of it right, Sam. We said Labour would win in London, the Blackpool South by-election. We said they'd win the new East Midlands mayoralty. And we did say the Tories are on course for a disastrous 500 council seat losses. All of that played out. We didn't know which way the West Midlands was going to go. I think you said Andy Street was going to sneak it, Sam, and he didn't. It was very, very close, but he didn't. And I don't think either of us dreamed for a minute that Labour might win in North Yorkshire, the Toryest of Tory areas. I used to work for the Yorkshire Post. North Yorkshire was just like the true blue bit of the map, and you'd never dream of Labour winning a mayoralty up there.
The Tory there drove around in Peggy the Peugeot, stayed in it for a lot of the campaign. I actually think that in Conservative headquarters they thought the campaign was completely mad, so that's their excuse for losing.
But they still sent Rishi Sunak there on the Friday morning to do his clip in the constituency they just lost.
And that was where Rishi Sunak chose to vote. So Rishi Sunak voted for Peggy the Peugeot. But look, you asked why did we not get Andy Street right? And the way
that's why you didn't get Andy Street right.
Oh, good point, well made. And the reason for that is that when trying to work out what's happening, often a good rule is to find out the midpoint of what the Tories are telling you and what Labour were telling you. And both the Tories and the Labour Party were saying Andy Street was going to win. And that's why I thought it was quite likely. Now, the polling was too close to call, if anything, edging towards Andy Street staying, although that came out after our podcast. But that midpoint of expectations is usually right, Jack, but clearly not always.
I have to say Labour are quite smug this weekend about expectation management. We gave them a bit of a kicking for it last weekend. Well, they felt they'd got to a point on Saturday whereby a Labour win in the West Midlands would be a nice surprise for them, and sure enough it was. So, OK, we'll have to doff our caps to them on that one, I suppose, grudgingly.
At the point at which they were saying Andy Street was going to win, they were reallocating resources from the Tees Valley. They knew there was a sniff of victory, so they weren't quite being transparent with us.
It seems to me now on Sunday afternoon that where we are right now in British politics is watching a Conservative Party playing out yet another internal battle, and this one is a battle over the narrative for what just happened in these local elections. And if you were fortunate or unfortunate enough to spend your Sunday morning watching all the Sunday shows, you'll have seen that playing out on your TV screens. We had Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, probably the closest Rishi Sunak ally in the cabinet, maybe, saying on these numbers we're on course for a hung parliament. It's not that bad. Now, lots of people would disagree with that assessment, given to get there you'd need everyone who voted in the local elections to do exactly the same thing in a national election, which obviously never happens, not least because it doesn't factor in the Reform UK factor, who didn't only stand in, what did they stand in, 1 in 10 seats, something like that. It doesn't take into account Scotland. But still, Mark Harper pushing that narrative on every show, we're on course for a hung parliament here, it's not all doom and gloom. At the other end, you saw Suella Braverman, perhaps Rishi Sunak's biggest critic on the backbenches, saying with her sort of characteristic understatement that on these results the Tories will be lucky to have any MPs left at all. And so in between those two narratives, somewhere in the middle probably is the truth, and the Tory MPs have had this long bank holiday weekend to stew on it all before they return to Parliament on Tuesday afternoon. I mean, it's pretty clear sitting here, Sam, there isn't going to be some big leadership challenge this week to Rishi Sunak. So how is this argument actually going to play out?
Well, I think everyone is still digesting the huge array of results that we got from all the votes that took place on Thursday. And the biggest conclusion that I have drawn, having studied them very closely while sitting on set over Friday and Saturday, is that we are seeing the unwinding of the coalition that delivered Boris Johnson that 80-strong majority in 2019. It was quite a remarkable knitting together of the red wall, which fell Tory for the first time in many places, of problems in the blue wall, and you saw Labour make advances, particularly in Leave areas. I think that's one of the things we'll come on to, why there's such jitters in parts of the Conservative Party. The scale of the swings was quite something. Blackpool South, the by-election, saw basically one of the biggest swings since the Second World War. It is a by-election. That doesn't mean those trends would repeat in a general election, but it was still at the upper end of what you could see. And the march of reform, I think, which, say, in that Blackpool South by-election was just only a few hundred votes behind the Tories. All of that, I think, means that the achievement of Boris Johnson has been undone and unwound. Rishi Sunak hasn't created his own election winning coalition. When I put it to somebody on the sort of Tory campaign team that this is what had happened, they said, well, to a certain extent, you know, the unwinding of Boris Johnson's coalition was what happened at last year's local elections as well, which is hardly a denial that that's what's happening. So, but right now, that's not how Downing Street and CCHQ, Conservative headquarters, want you to see it. They want you to take an altogether more rosy picture. They want you to think of the lines that you were just talking about from Mark Harper, that there could be a hung parliament under an approximation of these results in the impossible situation that this voting pattern is repeated in a general election. They want you to think that Andy Street's defeat was just by, as mayor of the West Midlands, was just by a few hundred votes, and he was lucky to be elected last time round. So Rick Holden, who's the Conservative Party chairman, was messaging on Saturday night the Conservative MP WhatsApp group, and I was lucky enough to get hold of leaked messages from that, and he was asserting to Tories that the Tory party is still in it in the race for the general election, and that they should take some heart from that.
That's not a view shared by that many Tory MPs that you speak to in private, is it? Let's face it, they can push the narrative of harder they like. And of course, what else can they say? They can only sit there and say, no, it's over. We're just going to bat out time until November. But you'd be hard pressed to find a Tory MP, as you well know, who'll say in private, yeah, I still think we've got a good chance of turning this around. They don't think that, do they?
They are much more likely to believe the article in Conservative Home, published on Sunday morning by William Atkinson. Now, he wrote one of the most devastating sort of takedowns of the position of Conservative headquarters.
This is the one that was just titled Goodbye.
After the very last ever Blackadder episode, where Blackadder tries every single way, including pretending madness, to avoid going over the top of the trenches and into no man's land and enemy territory before being gunned down mercilessly by their opponents. So invoking that, he said quite simply, reality couldn't be fooled. And in this article, he made clear how we should even see the Conservative Party chairman in this voice clip of his article.
These elections have only confirmed that the Conservatives are heading for the electoral equivalent of the Chicxulub asteroid impact, except that this time, one or two dinosaurs might survive. Ignore the vote shares, Holden's comical alley routine, and Sunak's desperate smiles.
So remember, that's the view of Conservative Home, in many ways the in-house journal of the Conservative Party. So where are we? Well, as you just made reference to, it is not the case that Tory MPs are going to unsheath their weapons and come for Rishi Sunak now. I think one of the sort of emotions that you detect when you make all the calls to Tory MPs that I've been making is they're just exhausted. There isn't the fight. And even the rebels are briefing that they are laying down their arms. These are the rebels that have been drawing up grids of shit for weeks and have been promising that this would be the moment of reckoning. Now the moment of reckoning is happening. They briefed on Friday that they were going to the pub. I wasn't even aware that they had left the pub, said one Sunakite acidly when I spoke to them. But that doesn't mean that there's kind of any hope to be found. Let me just read you what one of them told me this morning. I just think it's beyond repair. It's beyond the pale. The party is so effing damaged. I can't see what Rishi Sunak does now without it kicking off in one corner of the party or another. There is no point.
And that really is the point that I was getting to. It's very hard to find any Tory MP who thinks there is any point or that this is going anywhere now. And it's very hard to find people who will stick up for the Conservative Party more broadly. Just doesn't feel like there's a plan to turn this around. And Mark Hopper going on the airwaves and saying, don't worry, we're on course for a hung parliament, clearly isn't a strategy.
It had shades of Theresa May. Nothing has changed about it this morning. Tory MPs think it's worse than it was 12 months ago because then they had 12 months to turn it around. And one of the big things is the emergence of Reform UK as a real-life electoral force. Previously, it had largely been a sort of number on polling documents, but now it took flesh, and whether it was in Hartlepool, where it ate into the Tory vote, or whether it was in Blackpool South, where it was just below, where they almost scored the same as the Tory party, that looks and feels real. And all over the West Midlands, they were looking at that Reform UK vote, wondering whether or not in a general election that repeated would cost them. And then there were just odd moments that really irritate Tory MPs. So the one bright spot for Rishi Sunak was what happened in the Tees Valley, the re-election for the third time of Ben Houchen. But the swing from the Conservative Party to Labour, so the swing to Labour in the Tees Valley, was bigger than the one in West Midlands where Andy Street was defeated. So even in the one bright spot, they did worse than they did in the place with the enormous symbolic loss. Another argument that they're trying on MPs, look, incumbency works, hard work works, having a profile in your local area works. There are some that are going, well, look, the defeat of Andy Street and the election of Labour's Richard Parker, who has almost no profile, proves that that's not true.
And for the Labour Party, Sam, I mean, it feels like tea and medals for them today if you take two steps back and look at the results. But it wasn't all glorious, was it? I mean, this issue of Gaza eating into their vote is clearly going to be a sustained thing now. I assume we're going to see this at the general election as well. Is it going to matter much?
I think that it's hard to say because you can't do this complete read across. But let me just give you some individual little examples where it's clearly having an effect. There was a ward in the Newcastle council elections in Ellswick ward. Last year, the Labour Party won 71% of the vote. This year, the Labour Party lost on a swing of 30 points to the Greens, which the Greens themselves put down to the issue of Gaza. There are other councils like Oldham, where you think that potentially that was one of the reasons why the party lost the council. If you look in the West Midlands race, and then we've talked about him before, the kind of George Galloway protege, Ahmed Yaqub, the young lawyer, the TikTok lawyer, if you remember him from a couple of weeks ago, did incredibly well. Polls put his support on about 3%. He ended up with 10% plus. And Tories have been telling me, there's really quite something about him. As he was walking through that counting hall, he was an icon, one said. He's like a boxer surrounded by his team, draped in the Palestinian flag with prayer beads. It was kind of cool to watch. The very strong suspicion is that you haven't seen the end of him or that type of politics. Although it has to be said, it's not clear that Labour needs to worry that much, because where this is a problem is also in areas where Labour dominate. So can they afford to lose some of those votes and really it not make much of a difference at a general election?
They're certainly very keen to talk about this better spread of votes that they had under the Corbyn years, where they piled them all up in urban areas and it didn't actually help them very much in a first-past-the-post general election. Let's try and look more at the week ahead, Sam. I mean, Rishi Sunak wounded yet again. He's sort of Monty Python knight figure now with another arm lopped off, but he stumbles on and he's very keen to get back onto the front foot. He'll struggle to do much on Monday, given it's a bank holiday. But after that, Parliament's back, politics is back, and the Tories are very keen to keep pushing on the issues that they think they are strongest on. And that means immigration, it means welfare, and it means culture war issues. But looking at the diary, it's pretty clear that economic arguments are at least partly going to dominate this week, right? We've got Jeremy Hunt and Rachel Reeves in the Commons on Tuesday having drawing it out for monthly question time. She's got a speech later in the day, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Then we've got the Bank of England decision on interest rates on Thursday. We don't think they're going to cut them. Lots and lots of political pressure from the government to see interest rates start going down this year before the election, but not much prospect of that right at the minute. And then the big moment on Friday, the first set of quarterly GDP stats for the year. That'll happen at 7 a.m, and that is the moment we think Britain will officially come out of recession.
That is massive. So I suppose, Jack, the whole reason that you're reaching for one Monty Python sketch, which is the one where the knights get their arms lopped off, rather than a different Monty Python sketch as a metaphor for Rishi Sunak, which is the dead parrot sketch, is because this is a huge moment. He can finally say we're out of recession, which is rather necessary for a Prime Minister for whom 3 of their 5 pledges to the country, remember those we haven't talked about them in ages, are basic economic pledges, and this is potentially the most important one. So the government want to be all over saying, great news, guys, we're no longer going backwards.
Yeah, we may hear the phrase, the plan is working, a few times on Friday. Although I would just point out that when we went into recession, they were so quick to play it down and how it wasn't a real recession anyway, and they kept calling it a technical recession, and it didn't really matter, that if you want to claim a massive credit for coming out of it, then that feels a bit rich.
And they did say the plan is working all the way through recession as well, which hurt my head.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a plan. Anyway, what is Rishi Sunak going to do? He's going to be out at some community centre this week, we think?
That's right. I think he's going to be in London on Monday. He'll do a pool clip. Number 10, very keen to say he's not hiding. He's prepared to, he thinks there's a story to tell about the local elections, which suggests it's not all over, and he'll be doing that. They're sending no less than our pandemic friend Maria Caulfield, regular figure then. Now she's going to be out on the airwaves on Monday morning. It's going to be welfare week for the middle part of the week. They're going to talk about getting more people into jobs, and then the economic announcements at the back end of the week are going to be key. We're going to be watching very closely, however, when it comes to the economic story. There's 10 in the Sunday Times this week about how the government have set aside money for the contaminated blood scandal.
A mere £10 billion, apparently, to pay in compensation for all the people that were affected by that.
I'm wondering whether it might not be even more than that. It might be closer to £20 billion. We're looking at sums of £2 billion a year, I think, for several years. Now, the problem with that is, well, Jeremy Hunt's keen. Rishi Sunak hasn't yet, according to the Sunday Times, signed this off. Could that be to do with the fact that if you spend money on a contaminated blood compensation scheme, you're not spending it on either that massive defence announcement that you've already made and committed yourself to, or more pertinently, tax cuts that you might think might help you in the event of a general election, because, you know, they cost £4 to £6 billion as well.
Big question for me, Sam, is like, what is actually Rishi Sunak going to do now with the time he has left? If he's not going to be deposed, which he's obviously not going to be deposed, he is going to lead his party into this general election for better or possibly for worse. What does he do with his few remaining months now as Prime Minister? He's got 11 weeks until the summer recess, right? The local elections are now behind them. 10 of those weeks Parliament is sitting. There's a week for half term. What does he want to do with that time? What does he want to achieve? Because after the summer, you know what it's like. You have a couple of 3 weeks in September, and then we're into party conferences, and then he's calling an election, presumably, and then, you know, we're into the campaign. He's only got a short period of time now, a real run at it until July, to actually get anything else done that he wants to get done. And I was very struck listening to him on Sunrise Radio last week. They asked him about his proudest achievement as Prime Minister. He came up with some answer about playing cricket in the number 10 garden, and then talked a bit about planning law changes and funding for disabled toilets, which are important causes. But someone said to me,
at one point he wanted, I think, a chessboard on every kind of town centre.
Yes.
You know,
someone just reminded me of that famous Gordon Brown speech from 2008 when he lists all the things Labour did with their 10 years in power, and it's like minimum wage, independence for Bank of England, devolution, sure start, peace in Northern Ireland. And you look at that, and then you look at this, and you sort of think, don't you want to do something else, man, in the last few weeks? It could be of your prime ministership.
His biggest achievement, surely, would be the Windsor Framework normalising kind of international relations after solving the Northern Ireland question. Except in the last fortnight, he's gone running into a battle with Ireland over whether or not Ireland should be allowed to deport people who have gone there because of the Rwanda scheme back to UK shores. So the one achievement that you thought was at the centre of his premiership now is under a bit of a cloud.
We do know there's a couple of big legislative moments coming in the next few weeks, don't we? There's the sentencing bill and also the crime bill.
I think the sentencing bill I think Tory MPs may be on their back at the moment, but they're going to get grumpy. They're going to get angry. The sentencing bill, which makes the tariff for certain offences longer, is really designed to cut sentences in order to let people out of jail, ensure fewer people go to jail, because the prisons are full. The prisons are full. We've seen this several times. And there's a bill to try and reduce the prison population. But that's very, very unpopular with Tory MPs. There was a great Katie Balls column on this in the Times a few days ago. And I've been talking to Tory MPs who just want this piece of legislation dropped. That'll be a flashpoint. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have the crime bill. That's one of those Christmas tree bills where there are just so many different things hung upon it, including amendments on abortion of all different sorts, which will end up being tricky because it always is for governments of all stripes. And if they remain part of that, can that piece of legislation ever see the light of day? It's hard.
It's really hard. But what do Tory MPs do? You know, it seems like the rebels that have been talking to us so gleefully, you know, in the months gone by, and they were all talking about these local elections as their flashpoints, they've all now gone to the pub, and you have this sense of a party resigned to its fate. What are the rebels saying now to you, Sam? Are they looking back wistfully and thinking they should have gone for it at Christmas?
I mean, I think that they are a bit wistful in some senses. You know, the question is, why have they laid down their arms? And I think they would say that the real reason is that there's no more time to do anything. You know, there's no clear alternative candidate who gets what needs to be done. And there isn't right now the appetite off the back of the elections, although they think the elections point to absolute destruction of the Tory party in the general election. They sort of say, if anybody had been giving any signals that they were up for it, up for doing the job that they wanted, it was Penny Mordaunt. And there is reason to think that she might have been able, from her polling numbers, to have commanded some kind of bounce. But I think the rebels thought that by the end, she just wasn't prepared to do what the party needed, in their view, to get out of the hole that it's in. And they were always relatively clear-eyed. They always thought they probably, on balance, weren't going to succeed, and that there would be an enormous cost to the change that they were proposing. Changing leader again for the fourth time in the Parliament would enrage the public and make Britain look incredibly stupid. They always knew that. They thought there was a window back in December, January. It wasn't taken. There is no alternative emerging. So now it's just hunker down and head towards the gunfire, like William Atkinson in Conservative Home was suggesting.
Let's just talk quickly about Labour, Sam, before we go into the break, because they are very keen to celebrate their successes, as you would expect. Their main thing this week is a Rachel Reeves speech on Tuesday. They're keen to get back onto the issue of the economy because they think that is the thing that is going to win them the election above all else. And her aides are pretty frank that this speech is, quote, not about substance. This is going to be a political attack speech. Labour are very keen to push this line about Tory chaos. That is basically their big ticket card at this general election. She's going to talk about 5 more years of economic chaos or stability with Labour, and will point to all of the stuff that's happened since Boris Johnson's election in 2019 as evidence for that theme. We've heard Keir Starmer talk about it enough over the last few weeks and months. They're going to be doing some sort of social media blitz this week as well, so-called viral clips about, again, Tory chaos is their theme. And that's the message they want to push. And I think they want to get ahead of that moment on Friday that we were talking about earlier when Britain presumably comes out of a recession, and basically get their message out, which is, look, GDP can go up a bit, it can go down a bit, but do you really want things to carry on the way they have been? Do you feel better than you were 14 years ago when the Tories came to power? And they think that is an election-winning message, and you are going to hear that endlessly over the next 6 months.
Keir Starmer's going to be out with Yvette Cooper. I think they're looking to celebrate local election results. I think some of the surprise PCC victories for Labour in Cumbria.
PCC being?
Police and Crime Commissioners. Well done on picking me up on that. The ones in Cumbria, the ones in Avon and Somerset, I think were a bit of a surprise to Labour. So they'll be trying to bank those wins. And then they're going to spend a middle part of the week talking about secure borders. It's fair to say Labour had something of a nightmare last week over the question of how they would handle the question of small boats and what would happen to people who would come over deemed illegal under UK law, barred from being able to claim asylum under UK law when they got in before they had their own plan in place. In the end, it sounds like there will be an ability for those people to claim asylum, but Tories very keen to point to that news cycle as evidence of Labour chaos. So it does seem as if the Labour Party want to rectify that.
Also, very quickly interesting on Labour, David Miliband is in town this week. Remember
returns.
him? Yes, he's back. Starmer's office didn't even know he was coming, or at least that's what they said. But he's doing a big fireside chat with some think tank this week. David Miliband's views on anything and everything to do with what the UK government ought to be doing, which is interesting timing. He's even playing, Sam, in the lobby football match on Friday night at QPR. Can you believe that? You get to see David Miliband on shorts if you go down to Loftus Road on Friday evening, along with Ed Balls and several others.
As you know, I know nothing about football. I've never even been to a football match in my life, but I've heard about this match. It's the Parliamentary All-Stars. This is a revival of a game that used to happen. Andy Burnham, David Miliband, Sadiq Khan, Jim Murphy, plenty of others are going to be there. So I think it's going to be a nostalgia-tastic evening.
Naughties-tastic. All right, coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the political chaos in Scotland and the prospect of a serving UK government minister being sent to prison. Stay with us.
Welcome back. A week ago, Humza Yousaf was still the SNP leader despite the collapse of his coalition government and was hoping to fight on as First Minister of Scotland. But things move fast. Yousaf is no longer there, and the expectation by the end of last week was that John Swinney would be imminently coronated, like the chicken, as the First Minister. Jack, is that going to happen?
Well, amazingly, sitting here on Sunday, late on Sunday afternoon, we don't quite know if that is going to happen. There is little doubt, to be clear, John Swinney is going to be the next First Minister of Scotland. Kate Forbes was the only realistic contender, and she is out. She's decided to back him, probably because she wants to save her next leadership challenge until the SNP is in a better spot. So it is going to be John Swinney, but the planned coronation is now in some doubt because a veteran SNP activist wants to take John Swinney on for the SNP leadership. This is a guy who I had never heard of until my brilliant Scottish correspondent Andrew MacDonald at Politico texted me to tell me all about this. Graham McCormack. He holds no public office. He's not an MSP. He sometimes speaks at SNP conference, and he's reasonably well known within the parties.
And he's done one memorable thing in his career that we know about?
Rather memorably described Humza Yousaf's independent strategy as flatulence, which is not a ringing endorsement of the SNP's approach, I have to say. Graham McCormack did once stand for a Holyrood election, apparently, did not win. But he wants to make a challenge for the party leadership. And amazingly, he tells us he's got the numbers to do it, because when you look into the SNP leadership rules, Sam, it's absolutely mad. The bar to standing in an SNP leadership contest is incredibly low. You only have to be a party member with 100 other party members backing you. As long as those 100 are dotted around across 20 different sort of branches of the party, you're in.
So you've got somebody nobody's ever heard of able to challenge the leader. One Scottish Parliament veteran said to me that we truly have entered the banter era of the SNP.
Now, to be clear, we don't know yet whether this is going to happen. He's not doing on the record interviews, but he says he's got the numbers to do it. The deadline for nominations is noon on Monday, on Bank Holiday Monday, so we will find out then for sure whether he's right or whether he's wrong. If there's no challenge and he's wrong, then John Swinney will indeed be the SNP leader unopposed. He'll be sworn in as First Minister of Scotland this week. But if Graham McCormack is right and he's got the 100 official nominations, then we have a leadership contest on our hands, and John Swinney's coronation is off for at least a few weeks. While these two tussle it out in public, there'll be hustings, there'll be a big public debate about the future of the party, all the things, Sam, that the SNP top brass have been trying to avoid because they want this whole thing to be seamless and smooth.
So are they all on the same page, wanting him not to get on the ballot?
The SNP are desperate to avoid a contest for a number of reasons, right? One is obviously this presentation of unity, but let me give you some more. First of all, leadership elections cost money, right? And the SNP are skint. The last leadership contest cost the party £160,000. They don't want to spend loads of money on a leadership contest where they already know who's going to win.
It's amazing.
It would be a big delay to John Swinney's plans. He wants to come in, quickly smooth over what's happened and start laying out a plan for government, and he won't be able to do that because he's going to be having this battle with this guy no one's ever heard of. They'll have to have a public hustings at some point in May, which gives this activist the chance to attack the next First Minister in front of the media before he's even become First Minister. And interestingly as well, we would get a voting breakdown at the end of the contest, which might show us how many members the SNP have got and, crucially, how many have left, which they're never keen to tell us because they had these huge membership numbers back in their heyday and they've gone down and down and down. There is one possibility, which is that to become First Minister, you have to be an MSP. And Graham McCormack, as you may have noticed, is not an MSP. So even if he wins the SNP leadership, which of course he won't, he wouldn't actually be able to become First Minister anyway. So there is a possibility, some say in the SNP, that they just stitch it up and give it to Swinney even while the contest is ongoing, which would be extraordinary.
What magisterial chaos Graham McCormack is causing.
Yeah, to be clear, we'll only find out on Monday lunchtime whether any of this is going to happen. Regardless of what happens in that contest or over the next few weeks, we are on track for a John Swinney government. That is going to happen. It will be a minority government, whether it happens this week or at the end of May. He's going to be propped up by the Greens, no longer in coalition, but being supported on a vote-by-vote basis. I think we said this last week, Sam, but it bears repeating. The one group who are lapping all of this up, well, apart from you and me being very amused about it, are Scottish Labour. And, you know, the SNP chaos story is just absolutely manna from heaven for them. And we saw polling again today in the Sunday Times that they are on course to smash the SNP at the general election. Now, Sunday Times polling had Labour on 34% in Scotland, SNP on 29%. That's their worst polling since before the independence referendum. And on those numbers, they reckon Labour will be up from 2 seats to 28 in Scotland and the SNP down to just 15.
I'm told that John Swinney First Ministership would mean a return to centrist politics, less identity politics, more practical stuff. That wouldn't be quite as good for the Labour Party, but I mean, clearly they're loving the chaos.
Just very briefly, Sam, I did want to pick this up before we get on to the week ahead, because one other thing happening this week down in England is the deadline for the Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, to hand over the names of his sources to this public inquiry that's been going on for some time into SAS activity in Afghanistan. Now, this story feels like it's slightly gone under the radar, but it is actually a massive deal.
This is the most incredible story. It beggars belief and is a triumph of investigative journalism. Do you want to just explain what we're actually talking about, the issue at the heart of a public inquiry in all of this journalism?
Somehow feels incredibly underreported, this story, but I would implore people to read the huge Sunday Times investigation on this today. It's on their front page, it's inside the paper. They've been reporting on this for years, to be clear, but the one today really brings it home because they have been through all thousands of documents on the inquiry website. They have allegations from MOD whistleblowers that the SAS was operating effectively with impunity in Afghanistan over a series of months and years, killing dozens of unarmed people, men, sometimes even children, in murderous raids, that it was being covered up inside the government by the MOD while David Cameron was Prime Minister. I mean, this is recent history. David Cameron, of course, is now our Foreign Secretary. And Johnny Mercer was looking into this as Veterans Minister and, as you know, initially said there wasn't anything to see, but now tells a very different story. He's been threatened, as I say, with jail by the inquiry for refusing to name his sources for what he's told them. This inquiry looks like an explosion waiting to happen, but probably not for Johnny Mercer. Talking to people at the inquiry, it feels most likely like they are going to not push this any further. They don't actually want the appalling publicity of sending a government minister to prison for not revealing his sources. But just the incredible situation that we're seeing play out this week still feels like it's got a long way to run.
Just in terms of response, the Ministry of Defence said about the Sunday Times piece, it's not appropriate for them to comment on allegations which may be in the scope of a statutory inquiry, the inquiry that's going on. So MOD not challenging what's happening. They've been trying to do that in the court, but not standing in the way of that being published.
All people need to do is go on the website and read the statements, read Johnny Mercer's witness statement, read some of the other documents. It's all there in black and white.
It's a government cover-up of death squads is the allegation. It's incredible.
Let's get on with the week ahead. Sam, why don't you start with Monday?
Monday is a bank holiday, so there's no Parliament and not much action. But Rishi Sunak is doing a pool clip from London in a community centre. Keir Starmer is celebrating his victories in various police and crime commissioner races. And in Scotland, we have the noon deadline for the nominations to the Scottish leadership race. And there might be two contestants at that point, and chaos will ensue.
Or there might be one. Let's wait and see. Tuesday, Parliament is back with Treasury questions. Watch Jeremy Hunt versus Rachel Reeves if you want to, but don't try and get there by train because ASLEF are on strike again. Nominations close on Tuesday, Sam, for the replacement of William Ragg.
Texter William Ragg.
Indeed. Chair of the Commons Public Administration Committee. This is currently a two-horse race. Jackie Doyle-Price, the former minister, versus the Gedling MP, if that's how you pronounce it, Tom Randall. poll. I think most people think jacket oil price is going to win, but can never be too sure about that. And I think the voting for that and the result will come on Wednesday.
On Wednesday as well, you've got premises questions. I was talking to one Tory. They just think it's going to be very, very flat on the Tory benches. They're expecting an absolute pounding after the local elections from Keir Starmer. And the same day, you've got that deadline for Johnny Mercer to reveal his sources to the Afghan public inquiry.
Thursday, we get loads of new stats on the performance for the NHS. He talked about Rishi Sunak's now forgotten 5 pledges to the British people. That was supposed to be one of them. Bank of England rates decision at noon. Don't think they're going to change as much as the government would want them to. And then David Cameron is making a big speech on Thursday night at the Lord Mayor's banquet at Mansion House.
Friday is those GDP stats. Britain comes out of recession in all likelihood. Big moment for Rishi Sunak. Can he finally achieve prime ministerial liftoff with that?
Let's see. And then next Sunday, we're back at my house for another episode of this podcast. What have you got on in your life this week, Sam? Anything exciting?
I think we're going to do a fun story on Tuesday, if it all works out.
Ooh,
and
I like it when you do fun stories.
And then otherwise, it's a turbulent time. So I'm not moving very far from this spot in Westminster.
Do you know what I am? Sky, your art section, or in fact the wonderful Lucy Aitken who does your events, has invited me to a Sky Arts salon on Thursday. So I'm going to leave Westminster and the horrid, grubby swamp world behind me and go and hang out with like musicians and poets and things like that, and drink loads of nice wine courtesy of Sky. So think of me while you're on the telly picking over the local election results for the 15th time.
Well, that's clearly because Sky loves you, Jack. Anyway, have a lovely time. We'll see you at yours next week.
See you next week. Thank you.